Welcome. Listening to the two last speakers, I got inspired with the following question. Do you think that Moldova is a risky country or not? Maybe it's a rhetorical question, but I'm asking you because by some standards, Moldova is a risky country. But I will try to be honest with you today, like said Mr. Barack Obama in his speech, I will be always honest with you. And since my topic is Moldova's risk and reward profile, I want to share with you what means risk actually for Moldova. So, like I said, by some standards, you will find that Moldova is still a risky country. But outside of European Union and USA, and of course Monaco, there are places that makes Moldova look like Disney World. So, then there is our neighbor Russia, with the authoritarian government, with the political interference in the case sectors, and they still have appetite for expropriation. Well, the good news about Moldova is that using a proper risk assessment tool, your returns on the investment can be very rewarding. I will try to share with you these 3 points. The type of risks in a project finance, why project finance? Analyzing the list of participants for Monaco, I saw telecom operators, financial consultants, investment bankers, and I decided to use a project finance in telecom sector as an example to see how we can identify risks, how to price them and mitigate. I was a fortunate guy being taught by my professor, Mr. Schmidt, and he said always, Igor, a safe dollar is always good and is better than a risky dollar. And let's be honest, you will not invest in Moldova unless you see a prospect of a high return, right? This chart will show you what I mean by identifying, pricing, and mitigating risks. All financial guys will tell you that cost of equity always includes the risk adjustment for the investment. In our case, you see on the left side the return on equity A, which means it's not so good. Yeah? You could be in this situation in Moldova too if you will not mitigate the risks which arises from such a project. Excess, on the right side, you will find this lower risk, which means you create the value for the shareholders. So I said it before, I will use this telecom project finance as an example. I saw so many companies for privatization, including telecom. If you ever think to merge or acquire a company in Moldova, you may want to consider these a few steps. How to structure a cross-border transaction, which kind of fund you should raise, how to tap the capital markets and in which country, because as we know, in Moldova, there is no capital market at all. Vendor financing, how to work with ECA, Export Credit Agency, in order to mitigate the political risk, and so on. This is the structure I designed specially for you to understand the scale of the project in case you are thinking to invest in Moldova through a project finance. And you know, from the IFC perspective, I mean International Finance Corporation, project finance is a real tool of investment securing your money in Moldova. Of course, this is more complicated than maybe is our Moldova, but you should consider using all these multi-finance institutions, using, why not, bondholders, export credit agencies. For example, you have, if I'm not mistaken, in France, COFAS or something like that. And of course, you will face challenges like drafting project documentation, intercreditor agreements, the agreements with the telecom purchase agreement with the off-taker, and so on. This is kind of portfolio return you want to see if you will make investment in Moldova. What I mean by this is that all these risks, which will be identified in Moldova, should be down, and the return on equity should be, of course, bigger. Otherwise, you will not get your own premium for the emerging markets. So risk identification and allocation. It is the essence of every project finance that experts or lawyers identify the risk, evaluate them correctly, and mitigate them. I will walk through, take into account the time limitation, I will walk through every risk. For example, let's say completion risk. If you think to invest in Moldova and someday the construction company will call you and will say, hey, I cannot complete on time this project, what will happen? So this is a risk to be considered for the delays out and for cost overruns. Another is permitting risk, which means that you should have your concession agreements in place, your license, otherwise your business is not worth. So price risk, resource risk, damage, technological, operational, exchange, and so on. I will make a deep dive only in the political risk. Why? Because this is still actual for Moldova too. Political risks may arise from policy changes by governments, imposed on changing controls or imposed on exchange rates and interest rates. You should consider export credit agencies like COFAS in France, as I said, Hermes, for example, it is in Germany. You have also the Overseas Private Investment Corporation, OPIC. You have MIGA. All these institutions, international institutions, are looking to cover political risk. Which kind of risk? Sometimes you will face, let's say, protracted default, or commercial risks, or a revolution, let's say, or a smaller one, the conversion and transfer risk. But of course, you should consider also in drafting project documentation to insert the arbitration law which brings your disputes to Washington at least. Subject of exception could be security, concession, and insurance. What means this chart? This chart means that if we assume that your current position is over there where the star is, you should consider that this is the maximum level of risk the investor is willing to accept in order to not go under the minimum requirements of the country or minimum requirements of the stakeholders, because sometimes you can not be able to pay the dividend out. This chart will explain the kind of buffer between the risk appetite and the risk capacity you are willing to accept, because before investing in every country, you should consider a risk appetite statement in order to outline the aggregate levels of risk of risk which you want to accept. I heard from Mr. Montano from National Bank that banks in Moldova have a rate of return of 19 or something like that. In business area, you should assure yourself that you get at least a ratio 1 to 3, which means you have 3 times bigger returns and rewards than risks. Otherwise, you will not create the shareholder value. Another approach to mitigate risk is the correct valuation. If, let's say, we are talking now about a merger or a takeover in Moldova, then the correct valuation should be in place. Sorry for this, it's a format thing, I have right one. The formulas, the known formulas for valuation, like discounted cash flow or economic value added, these formulas are known worldwide. But for Moldova, there are some issues which you should consider. For example, using multiples for selling a company. EBITDA multiply with how much? Because in Moldova you have only one multiple, you have not two. So another common mistakes made is you don't have a historical data. You have no empirical data rooms like in other countries. So you are not able to evaluate exactly what's the price of the company. So the need for a business lawyer. I would say that our role for as a business lawyer is changing. And the law itself in Moldova is changing itself. We are at the center of this changing, and I think that we have a greater vision, and we see these risks as a whole better than every other investors. So I will conclude with these few points. If you ever think to invest in Moldova, my advice to you is start with an investment and objective policy and a risk appetite statement. Of course, employ experts specialized in finance in order to run such a project finance as I described. It's very important to identify, price, and mitigate the risks on your way. It's also important to have a comprehensive information on time from technical market experts, from technological experts, from environmental experts, and of course, use of international financing like multilateral development banks and other financial institutions, EBRD, World Bank, IFC, because all these banks will help you also to mitigate the risks. Yeah, and why not using also bondholders? I think you will find more on capital markets outside of Moldova, but they're also willing to accept such a risk in project finance. So thank you very much. And the last advice to you is please take a little bit of time and visit our undergrounds with winery and taste our wine because you have no risks, only rewards. Thank you.